Welcome, nutritionradio.org listeners. This is Lonnie Lowry, a university nutrition professor of over 20 years and podcast host of long-running shows like Iron Radio. Come on in. Fitness Fridays.
Hey everybody, welcome to another brief episode of Nutrition Radio. As listeners know, we also cover fitness. I want to do a couple of things today. News, a question from a listener through YouTube, and a rant. So let's start with this quick news. There's a Don't Miss conference, in my opinion, that happens every summer, typically in June. It's the ISSN meeting, the International Society of Sports Nutrition. I probably should have announced this weeks ago because I'm actually traveling to it while you're listening to this show. But they cover all kinds of things, not just for a dietitian, or it's not just clinical. A lot of lay people are there. Yes, there's a lot of PhDs and dietitians and other kinds of people, such as trainers and whatnot. I just want to run down a quick list of some of the people and some of the topics that are there. So you might think about it next year, or who knows, if you live near Fort Lauderdale, Florida, maybe you could even jump in and do it now. We have a couple of good talks here that I just want to highlight. Guillermo Escalante, who I've worked with before, he's talking about potential risks of anabolic steroid abuse and strategies to mitigate them. That's really pretty edgy. A lot of people don't even want to touch that topic, and he is going to bring his expertise to that. He's not only, I believe he's an assistant dean, he's an exercise physiology professor, he's also a high-level competitive bodybuilder, so that's going to be a good one. There's a talk on GLP-1 agonists, very cool. I think maybe you're living under a rock if you haven't heard about the fat loss qualities of those. We covered them briefly in episode 32. There's a lecture on what astaxanthin is doing in mitochondria, right, in the powerhouses of your cells. So all this is like in day one, just, chock full of stuff. Frequently asked questions about creatine supplementation. If you want to know from people that you can trust, this is where you go. Later, we have stuff from Chad Kirksick. I work with Chad occasionally as well. He's talking about leucine dipeptide and stimulating muscle protein synthesis. That's very interesting to me. Leucine, of course, is a protein synthetic trigger, and sometimes you'll see cool stuff on di or tripeptides and how they, might be absorbed and whatnot. There's a talk from Arnie Ferrando, very senior powerhouse researcher on hormonal dysregulation in muscle. You get the idea. There's quite a few cool things going on here. David Sandler is giving a talk on an insider's look at the dietary supplement industry. I think that's going to be real eye-opening for a lot of people. It's not completely unregulated like you see, like if you watch a movie like Bigger, Stronger, Faster, they're putting together capsules and snickering at the kitchen table or whatever. It's not quite like that, certainly not anymore. FDA does have some overreach. I'm not saying that DSHEA, the Dietary Supplement Health Education Act, isn't pretty liberal in allowing supplements to consumers in this country, in the U.S., but it would be great to look at the insider's look. Mike Nelson, a friend of the show, he's been on the show before and, of course, co-host of Iron Radio. He's giving a talk on psychedelics as new therapy and even psychedelic supplements. Very curious there. And I really want to see a talk from Dawn Anderson, another senior researcher, on control issues in coffee research. A lot of you know, if you've listened to Iron Radio before or you've been around for the 6 months or so that we've been on the air here at Nutrition Radio, again, kind of a sister show. I'm a coffee researcher. I do coffee research with Dr. Anderson. She's going to really offer some great insights because everything from whether or not you're habituated to how you're defining a cup of coffee, there's 100 different things you have to think about when you control coffee research and therefore what conclusions you can make. So final shout out. It's got a nice expo. There's booths there. There's people selling stuff. 20th annual ISSN conference going on June 15th to 17th. Essentially right now, Western Fort Lauderdale Beach Resort. Very cool. Okay, let's get on to the listener question. This is very edgy. We talked about how Guillermo Escalante addresses edgy things. This is not a nutrition question. It's more of a drug question, at least a kind of a gray market drug question from a listener, Craig Curtis, 3291. Again, through YouTube. It's a really brief question. Any data on peptide AOD 9604 for fat loss? Well, Craig, you opened a can of worms here because there's a bigger thing that I think I need to address first. Let's start with a disclaimer. The consequences of using illegal peptides could be severe. It's not just a legal repercussion that you could be worried about, it's potential health risks. Illegally obtained peptides could be counterfeit, poor quality, contaminated, really pose serious health hazards. I don't want to sound preachy. I know a lot of people who do this, they already understand these are gray market kinds of things. But I've also seen this go way bad. When you inject something subcutaneously or otherwise, you're bypassing your skin or even your gut barrier and introducing something directly into your body. Really bad things can happen in those sorts of things, especially when they're quote unquote dirty. So anyway, let's talk about AOD 9604 just briefly. To be completely transparent, I had to dig online a little bit because you're not going to see a ton of this stuff in the legitimate literature. But first things first, what is it? AOD 9604 is also known as Advanced Obesity Drug 9604. It's a peptide, so it's a string of amino acids, not quite the size of a protein, derived from human growth hormone. Rob Fortress-Fortney was on. We went back 20 years into the archives, and he was talking about how athletes abuse growth hormone, very lipolytic, right? Very fat loss inducing. Well, this is actually the fragment of this molecule that's really specific to the fat loss component, okay? The particular fragment that reportedly has fat burning properties without some of the other effects of being the full growth hormone or GH molecule. Now, the question was, any data on this? Well, the most relevant paper I've seen, I did promise I would look, is published in the Journal of Endocrinology and Metabolism, which, as I gather, is not fully indexed on Medline in the National Library of Medicine like many other journals are. It's a 2014 paper on the safety of the drug, and to be honest, I found it overly positive. As I understand it, it was authored by scientists with declared interests, they were transparent, in the pharma company that was involved with the peptide. Again, as I understand it. That doesn't make it bogus. You'll see people do that. I actually made some declarations in recent papers I did just so people understood where I work and what I do and that kind of thing, so you can decide if maybe I'm painting too rosy of a picture. It doesn't mean it's bogus. It's just worth keeping in mind. Now, they report that it looks safe in early testing, but of course that doesn't account for, again, those gray market risks that I talked about earlier. Do you even know you're getting the real peptide, right? Getting like a certificate of analysis and seeing, does it actually contain what it says it does? That would help some, but how do you really know? So obviously you're not going to be injecting a drug without serious medical oversight. Even if it's just from like an anti-aging clinic where a lot of people might find these sorts of things online and get some medical oversight. So now that we know what it is, let's talk about how it apparently works. It works by stimulating the breakdown of stored fat and inhibiting the formation of new fat. So again, it's kind of doing the very potent fat loss effects of what GH is doing. If you want to hear how dramatic it is, go listen to what Rob Fortney said. So it works by increasing the rate of lipolysis, right? Lipolysis, the breakdown of stored triglycerides in fat cells, and preventing the conversion of glucose into fat as well. So preventing some lipogenesis. So sort of a double whammy of fat loss in a sense, or, fat metabolism benefit. The peptide has shown promising results in very limited early studies, but again, very hard to find a lot of what I've seen on the fat loss part. Again, I mostly just found safety information very early stage. The fat loss part is mostly claims you're hearing from bodybuilders and fitness enthusiasts. But it has been suggested that it could bring about fat loss effects that GH does without some of the long-known side effects like raised blood sugar, right? Like a diabetogenic, if you will, effect. I guess when we're answering a listener question like this, it's responsible to say that, this is obviously not a magic solution for weight loss. It should be used in conjunction with a healthy diet, regular exercise, all the usual sort of caveats, I think, here. It may work when combined with a comprehensive fat loss program. I've seen bodybuilder websites stacking it with some of these semaglutide, some of these GLP-1 agonists, and that kind of thing for fat loss. But now we're in doping category, and it's just important to understand. So let me reiterate, like so much I've seen surrounding SARMs, which could be a topic for a whole nother day, it's a Wild West scenario out there that's not unlike what I saw with pro-hormones years ago. So it's just essential to keep in mind the research on AOD 9604, it's still very limited. The studies really need to be better understood in the context of giving it to people and what it's doing to their body fatness and that kind of thing. Consult with a healthcare professional. Okay, I'm trying not to be preachy, but also responsible here. And lastly, the rant, I'm going to have to really truncate this because we're almost out of time. But one of the things that I noticed lately when I was looking at common fitness questions was about unilateral versus bilateral training. And I see this a lot because I've been relegated to Planet Fitness as my gym right now, at least for the foreseeable future. I see a lot of people doing all kinds of what I think are contortionist kinds of single leg movements. Yes, there's a stability component and that kind of thing. But there was something on a website that I saw recently, and I just have to address it. Some of this is good and some is not so good. So it says bilateral versus unilateral lower body training. This is one of the supposedly top 10 most polarizing or controversial fitness topics. So it says unilateral lower body exercise offers similar strength and hypertrophy benefits to bilateral counterparts, along with two distinct advantages: lower compressive forces on the spine and a higher stability requirement. Well, okay, kind of. I don't think you're going to get the kind of hypertrophy, in my opinion, doing single leg presses versus just doing two legs. I don't want to get into the bilateral deficit and how that's very different in trained people. But what really caught my eye here was it says traditional bilateral squats and deadlifts aren't pointless, as some coaches have argued. Okay, stop. Who is arguing that squats and deadlifts are pointless? How is this one of the main controversies in our field? If this is people are badly misguided, honestly, this might just be some talking for the sake of talking. I don't see this as being an issue. It says, however, clients who aspire to be powerlifters, it'd be a must. Well, do you think? Since that's the movement, two of the three movements that are involved. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of point this out. Sometimes you'll see some of these questions about something that's very controversial. I'm not actually sure it really is. Maybe I'm just showing my bias as someone who is a bodybuilder and loved to squat, free bar squat. Almost all my friends are power lifters, but I just find it almost absurd that they're going to say, some coaches argue that bilateral lifts, right, squats and deadlifts are pointless. Wow. Okay, but I've gone over again. That's why season 2, we're going to go to longer episodes so we can unleash on some of these things with a co-host. I'd like to actually rotate in some visiting co-hosts, but we're going to end it there. Have a good weekend, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
The nutritionradio.org podcast is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, check with your physician, nutritionist, or qualified exercise physiologist in order to make the progress that you need.